All right, well, welcome again today, everybody, to today's webinar. My name is Alex, and I am going to be hosting today's webinar. I have historically with Aplos been the head of support, but more recently I've kind of switched roles into more of a product manager type role, which is still kind of being figured out, but I still help out with support, and I'm also kind of helping just make sure that everything's kind of running smoothly with the software overall. So some of you I've talked to before, some of you I've never met, but welcome to everyone. And I still have the privilege of doing these webinars, usually about once a week. Once a week we host a webinar that's a little bit more specific to somewhere within the software. So we take a look at, our accounting product or donations product, or, how to do something specific like a bank reconciliation. But then more recently, we've been doing these monthly webinars, which is what we're doing here today. And that goes over a more kind of broader topic. So not necessarily something specific to the software itself, but something a little bit more broad, like today. So today we're going over how to kind of close out the year in whatever accounting system you're using. So that can be Aplos, it could be anything. So that's kind of a broader topic, more geared towards any nonprofit or any church that might have need of it. Last month, we did something on online donations, kind of raising some year-end support. The month before that, keep saying year. The month before that, we did month-end closing kind of procedures, and then the month before that, we did something on journal entry, taking a look at debits and credits and how this accounting thing kind of works with itself. So if you're curious about those, I can get you the links to them. But for what we're doing here today is we're going to focus on this year-end closing procedures type stuff. So if you are a customer of Aplos, as we go through this, I'm going to kind of drop little Easter eggs for you. Because I'm going to be describing some processes that are not necessarily applicable to Aplos customers. So I'll tell you when to tune out, I guess, with those. But for those of you who do not use Aplos, hopefully this will provide kind of an overview of some helpful things to do at the end of the year to kind of make sure that everything is being taken care of, and that you're kind of squared away to tune out for a couple weeks here as we enter the Christmas and New Year's season. Let's see. You may have gotten the checklist, but in your GoToWebinar control panel, there is an attachments section or something, handouts. If you want to find that, it's one of those, it should be below questions, I think, but I attached the year-end accounting checklist there for you. So you can download that and kind of follow along as we go, but I've got it open here in this tab. If you don't have the handout, I'm going to send this to you all once we're done here today anyway. So if you just want to follow along as we go through here today, I can send you the link to this once we're done, so that way you've got it for your later use. So let's go through this. So this is the nonprofit accounting year-end checklist that we've created. Now, again, the idea of this is to kind of help you to kind of check all your boxes, or run all your bases, I guess, for the end of the year in some different categories. By no means is this a comprehensive list. This does not include everything that you're going to need to do, but hopefully it's a decent, decent list for you. And be sure to edit this as necessary. There's some stuff here that's not going to apply to you, so just use your own judgment there on what actually is applicable to you. But hopefully this helps as kind of a big overview. Now this goes into the order here. Usually, or on the checklist here, the first section is year-end reminders, and then it goes down from there. I'm actually going to start down here, which is the year-end transactions, because I think it works a little bit better. So for year-end transactions, again, all of this is kind of with the idea of it's getting to the end of the year. So what do I do to make sure that I'm good for this year? Well, the first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you've taken care of all of your transactions, okay? All of your year-end transactions. The first little box here is donations. So make sure you input all donations that were received or postmarked by December 31st of the closing year. What that means is if you've been receiving donations, and this, I guess, becomes more important towards the end of the month here in December, all donations that are either received by you or postmarked by December 31st still count for this fiscal year or this calendar year as far as the donor's credit goes. So if someone mails you a check on December 31st, but you don't get it until January 10th, do the deposit like you would normally in January, but you can count that donation for December's revenue. So that way, when you generate the contribution statement at the end of the year, that kind of last minute donation still gets credited to that donor for the 2015 year. Okay, so there's donations. The next one here is reimbursements. So kind of on the expense side, just make sure that you've got all of your expenses entered. Using a software, you might be able to do something like a bank integration, so you can download transactions from your bank to kind of make sure that everything's been, recorded, or at least communicated. One of which is reimbursements here. So if anybody's got any business expenses like gas reimbursement, or if anybody bought supplies or anything and needs a check, then make sure you get those out as well. Payroll. So make sure that your payroll is caught up for at the end of the year. This gets pretty weird. If you've got a pay run that spans the 2 years, you'll need to close the payroll as of the end of the year and then reopen it kind of in the middle of the period. That gets into however you're running payroll. If you have questions about that, let me know. But make sure you've run all your payroll for the year. You've kind of made sure that you've paid all your taxes, or retirement, flex spending, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that all of your payroll boxes are checked. And then make sure to check to make sure that all revenue and expenses that have been received prior to the year end are accounted for prior to closing the books. So same kind of idea of what we just talked about. So all of the income, all of the expenses that you've been receiving, all that different stuff. Just make sure everything is entered by the end of the year. So that way you don't have to do a bunch of work in January to catch up, and that you kind of just finish out the year. Now, depending on what the accounting software is that you use, you may need to actually post closing entries, which I don't know if it's an item up here. It might be, but I'm just going to mention it now. In software like Aplos, you don't need to do this, because what we do is we just run the reports based on the date range that you put in. So some softwares and kind of traditional accounting, you would build balances on your income and expense accounts throughout the course of the year. So call it January through December. You're recording transactions, you're receiving stuff, you're spending money, whatever. You got these balances accumulating for the year. At the end of the year, what you would do is you would basically reverse those accounts, bring them back down to zero, and kind of roll the net income or loss into your equity for the end of the year. And that would be what's called a closing entry for the year. Now, most softwares don't require you to do that, or they have a button that does it for you automatically. For instance, in Aplos, you don't need to touch that. That doesn't matter. But if that is still part of your process, make sure to first make sure all of your transactions are entered, all of your revenue and expenses, income and expenses. And then once you're done there, just go about the normal kind of closing procedure for posting that journal entry, rolling everything up into your equity. And so that way you can start January 1 fresh. And then the last item here is complete your normal month-end checklist and bank reconciliation for the final month of the year. Again, like I mentioned, we did another webinar on month-end closing procedures, and we've got another checklist much like this that kind of walks through a couple things just to make sure your boxes are checked. So if you want that, let me know. I can get it to you. But really what the month-end checklist assumes in a kind of nutshell is along the same lines. Make sure all your transactions are entered, make sure you've cut all the checks you need to, you've paid all the bills you need to, and then make sure you do a bank reconciliation to make sure that your accounting record is lined up with your bank's statement for however many accounts that you have. Okay, so that's kind of on the transaction side, year-end transactions. Now I'm going to go over to this review accounts section next. So review accounts. Run your annual reports to check for accuracy and all accounts balance, adjust entries as needed, and rerun reports and print for your records. So as you go through this, if you run your annual income statement by month, your balance sheet, your budget to actual, all of those reports that you might be running, take a deep scan. So make sure everything looks okay, everything looks healthy, everything looks accurate. There was a customer that I was working with just today, actually, or over the past couple of days, that she noticed that her income looked a lot higher than it should. So we kind of took a look at it, and there were some entry, issues. There was whatever in the software. There's a reason for that, but it only happened when she looked at her kind of total income for the year. So pay attention to that. That is actually something that is probably more of a monthly item for you, just kind of reviewing your reports and making sure that everything looks copacetic. But make sure you do that here at the year's end as well. and then make any adjustments necessary. So if something doesn't work, or if you need to, if there's duplicate transactions, or if there's entered transactions or some sort of error, make sure to adjust those as needed and then rerun your reports, because you want, at the end of the year, you want kind of a final record of all of your reports so that you can file that away. That's kind of your solidifying, like, end of the year reports that you might use for your tax report, whatever you need to do, or give to your board, whatever happens. So anyway, make sure to get that done there. The next item here is confirm your bank account balances. This kind of ties into the bank reconciliation item that we talked about a second ago, but go through the bank reconciliation process. That, again, compares your accounting record. So Aplos or QuickBooks, whatever you use, confirms your accounting record with your bank statement. So that way, at the end of the year, December 31, you know that the bank and Aplos have the exact same record, the exact same balance. So you can kind of move into the next year knowing that you've got the right amount of money. No one wants to, think they have an amount of money when it actually is different. So confirm your bank account balances. Also confirm fund balances carried into the next year. Now, in Aplos, this is kind of similar to the bank rec process. Bank rec ensures that the bank accounts are accurate. You've got as much money as you think you do. Now, what a fund balance confirmation includes is basically you take that balance. So let's say your checking account ends in $10,000, and you want to make sure that that $10,000 is divvied out to the funds as necessary. So make sure you're paying attention to that. There's really no process that we've got for that. You kind of just have to use your judgment. We don't have a way to tell if you're allocating things properly. That's kind of up to you. But keep an eye on that. Make sure that your fund balances look somewhat correct. Not somewhat, they look correct. If you've got one fund that's like super negative and other ones that are positive, that might be a red flag. So anyway, just pay attention to the fund balances there. Next item here is confirm account signatories are still valid. So make sure that the people involved in your account and people that can sign for your accounts are still valid. They're still around. Everybody's still participating as they should. Just make sure everybody's still on board there. Conduct open healthcare open enrollment if applicable. Some companies do this on a calendar year basis. Some people do it in weird months like March, like we do. So just do it whenever you want. If that is an applicable item for you at the end of the year, just make sure to check that box as well. Also review internal controls. For those of you who don't know what internal controls are, those are systems that you put in place to basically safeguard yourself against fraud or any sort of mishap accounting-wise. So if you've got an internal control system mocked up, then make sure that everything is kind of still relevant, it's still working. You can kind of do like a little mini internal control audit on your own end just to make sure everything still makes sense. So review those. If you would like some coaching on what internal controls are in general and how you can implement them, then let us know. Prepare your budget for the next year and review your chart of accounts and designated funds based on your anticipated needs. All that means is just make sure that what you're doing currently, you still want to do next year, and then make a budget. So review your chart of accounts. So is there an expense account or an income account that you have set up, but you never used? You didn't use it all year and you don't really see yourself using it? Delete it or hide it, whatever. Unclutter your chart of accounts. Or if you ended up spending money in a certain way that you didn't anticipate, and so you've been kind of coding it to a different account all year, you might need to create a category for it, then go for it. Same with your designated funds. Usually funds are pretty set, I guess, for each organization. You don't usually all of a sudden create new funds or close old ones, but you might. But just make sure that the funds you have set up in your account are still relevant. If you need to close any out, go through that process. We can help with that if you use Aplos. So just kind of make sure that your accounts and your funds are still relevant and are set up for the next year. Once you do that, then I would recommend doing your budget. So take a look at what you did this year as far as income and expense goes, and kind of set a goal for next year. And that is completely dependent on however you guys budget and or what you think you're going to do. So just an item there. And then last one in this section is review insurance policies to confirm they are adequate. So any sort of insurance that you've got going on, make sure that you still have the applicable policy that is, current. A lot of you might, again, be on a different schedule. It might not be a January through December thing. It might be, June through May or whatever. So anyway, if it's applicable, do it. If not, check the box and move on to the next section, which I'm going to do up here, year-end reminders. So we went through year-end transactions. We did review accounts now. It gets into less accounting-y kind of stuff and more of just best business practice type things. So other year-end reminders here, housing allowance. For you faith-based organizations, you might have housing allowance for your ministers or pastors or whatever set up, and these might change, or you might want to change them, might change their amount or details. So if that is something that applies to you, make sure that you go through that process of just making sure that that's still, relevant, or if you need to make any changes, do so. Also W-4, so for your employees, make sure that they review their W-4 and confirm that the information is correct. If they've moved, if they've changed any of their information, whatever, make sure that they update that for you. And then identify if any employee should be reclassified or withholding amounts changed in the new year. So just make sure that they're still on board. They haven't had any change of family, change of address, change of info, whatever. Just make sure everything is still relevant for your employees. And then your notice to donors here. Remind donors to wait to file taxes until they have received their contribution summary. Also, if you have time, send donors an advance statement with their current donation balance and ask for a year-end donation. This is kind of more of a best practice type thing. So it's December 15th now. By the time someone watches this, it might be closer to the end of the month. But what you could do is you could send them a contribution statement as of today and say, hey, as of December 15th, this is how much you've donated to this year to these different funds. You want to do more, whatever you want to say, that might be a good opportunity for them to remind them that, hey, the end of the year is coming. If you want to get any more tax deductible donations in for the year, now would be a great time. So you can remind them that, but then, remind them to wait to file their taxes until they've received their contribution summary. So they're going to need that completed year-end, all the way through December 31, that year-end statement before they file their taxes. Some people are pretty gung-ho about that. In January, I tend to wait until May 14th or April 14th and file my taxes. Anyways, remind them to wait until they have their contributions. And then last thing here is Christmas gifts. So some gifts that you give to ministers, employees, or volunteers may be considered taxable income. So make sure to handle those carefully. Just if you've got an internal accountant, make sure to ask them or consult a CPA on that, because that gets pretty nitty gritty. But if you're buying them things, if you bake them chocolates or something, they're not going to deduct that. But, if you give them an item or something, it might be considered taxable income. So just be wary of that and handle it properly. Last area that we're going to cover here today is tax forms. So the last kind of subsection here. Review W-4 forms from employees and note any needed changes. So once you've done this to remind employees to review it, then review those changes and you make any of the changes needed. So if they've upped their withholdings or if they've changed their info, make sure to do that on your end in whatever software that you use for that. Also, complete the IRS Form 1099 for vendors by January 31st. That 1099 form, for those of you who do not know what that is, if you pay anyone non-salary, non-employee compensation, so the guy that came out and did work on your property, or if you kind of subcontract work to someone to do, your bookkeeping or whatever, you outsource something, they may need a 1099. Now, there's a certain thresholds and there's different, qualifying categories for that. So consult the IRS standards for what you need for the 1099, but that form needs to go out to them by January 31st. So make sure all of your expenses are entered, all of your books are closed, you've got all of the vendors, address and tax ID and all that different stuff, and get those 1099s out by the end of January 31st. And same kind of thing for contribution statements. So make sure to remind your donors, have them send their last stuff, make sure you have it in there by December 31st, and then their contribution statements need to be out by January 31st as well. So complete your records, make sure you've got all your donors entered, Make sure you've got their addresses or their emails, however you distribute those forms, and then complete those contribution statements by the end of January. Okay. Last thing here. Remember, if you are not an Aplos customer, don't forget to back up your data. So for Aplos, we do this for you automatically. No need to do so. So if you use something else like QuickBooks Desktop, if you're not using an online solution, make sure to close out all your books, do a backup, put that somewhere safe, so that way if, God forbid, something happened, you can at least restore as of kind of the beginning of the new year, 2016. If you're an Aplos customer, we do it for you. And there's a little plug here. So Plus now is a great time to switch to a new accounting software. So next year's accounting is even easier. Okay. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, we provide online software for nonprofits and churches, the flagship of which is a fund accounting product. So we allow a lot of this stuff to be pretty easy. All this transaction entry, closing entry, and end of the year reporting stuff is pretty simple in Aplos. And we've also been designed specifically for nonprofits and churches. So if you've been using an accounting system that is not a fund accounting system, and by the way, no version of QuickBooks is a fund accounting software. Anyways, if you've been using a non-fund accounting software, now might be a good time to consider switching to one of which we can help with. So anyway, end of the year's coming, good time to switch. So that's been a decent amount of information for you. So what I'd like to do now for the remaining time that we have together is open it up for some question and answer time. I see that a number of questions have come through as well. So I will do my best to answer everything in just a minute. A couple of things there. One, I am not an accounting, well, I guess I'm technically an accounting professional, but I am not a licensed CPA. So if you have questions that get more into CPAE type things, I'm going to tell you that it's not really our wheelhouse. You might want to consult a professional, but just keep that in mind. There might be some questions that I cannot answer, but I'll do my best. And then last thing, if you are watching this webinar after the fact, pre-recorded, then I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for watching this. If you have any questions on this or anything else Aplos related, then feel free to email support@aplos.com or give us a call, and we'd be happy to help you through that. Also, if you need that year-end accounting checklist, just mention that in the email, or if you Google Aplos year-end checklist, it's probably the first link, and you can get it there as well. Alrighty, I'm going to mute myself for just a minute or two and see what questions come through, and then I will do my best to answer everything for you. Be right back.